next thing, and we're in election season, so we're kind of in a quandary, and we just need to bring it before the council, so I'll turn it over to you, Eric.
Yeah, so the reason this is coming, and Catherine, I do apologize for not calling you. I didn't call anybody on this, so it wasn't just you. It wasn't anybody. So because as it's a discussion item and because how it came up, that's all I thought it would be, as a discussion item. So, and the reason this is coming up is because there's been some citizen complaints. This isn't coming from the council, it's coming from the citizens, that if the radio is not allowing candidates to speak on the radio or campaign on the radio or anything like that, because it's a city property, then should any candidate be able to be on city property campaigning if they're doing it on their own? Now, if it's a, like the candidate forum at the library is promoted by a third party, so it's not any one candidate just going to the library. So that's just what we wanted to bring up as a discussion. Do we want to be consistent with city property and candidates actually being on those properties, doing campaign and meetings and stuff? And again, this comes from complaint from citizens saying, we're not being consistent.
Eric, do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So you're talking about city-owned property, not leased city-owned property?
Yes, city-owned property.
Right, but not if it's leased, then that doesn't
Such as?
apply.
Such as?
Lions Club, at one time it was a golf course,
Yeah, Lions Club.
and Philly had already made
CIC.
a judgment on that, so.
Well,
So if it's owned by, if somebody's leasing something from the city, then the person that's leasing it puts it in a different realm, and they can have advertisement like at the golf course did here 2 years ago. That's a city-owned golf course, but it was leased to Xander, and he was allowed to put political things out there. So same with the Lions Club, that's leased also.
Well, again, it came up because we had a complaint that we weren't having standards. Went back to when Brent had a discussion with Crystal about the Lions Club before, and the determination, and Brent can speak to it, but the determination was you couldn't have an individual person, but you could have a candidates forum. So Brent, you want to just speak to it?
Yeah. Am I on there? Yeah. So that was our conclusion, to be conservative, is rather than any one individual renting city property, is that we would only allow city property to be used in those candidate type where everybody had. But again, it's your call.
Well, that's not consistent with what was done 2 years ago. I've got a thing from you here that says that, that you can if it's being leased. So.
Can individually or
You
can have?
can, it doesn't fall into the same realm as, like, say, the library or the convention center or the city office.
Can I see that? My wife says I can't remember conversations we've never had.
So I also have the letter that you wrote 2 years ago, Brent, if you want a copy of it, and I'll just read from the conclusion, your conclusion. Based on my research and confirmation, this was about the golf course, is not a public facility as defined in RCW 42.17A.555. The golf course operator did not violate state law by actively campaigning in favor of one or more council candidates and actively campaigning against another candidate by, wasn't decimating, written materials, must have been distributing written materials and having verbal discussion with golf course patrons. And you had asked PDC about this.
Yeah,
Is that the one
that's the one yes.
you're looking at? Okay.
Yeah.
So it seems to me from reading what you said and reading the RCW, that the Lions Club, being the only one of the city-owned properties that's leased out, is the only one that would not be a public facility, and therefore under that conclusion that you drew. However, the other buildings we have would be, so they are subject to the RCW. Is that how you would interpret it now?
Yeah, refreshing that.
Do we lease the CIC or
Yeah,
do they just,
the CIC would fall under that same category as
so
the
they
Lions
actually
Club.
pay us for using that building? They don't pay, does the Lions Club pay us to use the building?
Well,
We have a lease.
yes, we have a lease. We have a lease.
So that means they write us a check.
Yeah.
No, they don't.
Okay, does the CIC write us a check?
No.
Does the, well, obviously library doesn't count. If they don't write us a check, how do we have a lease? Help me with that. There's gotta be value received.
Sorry.
Yeah, I,
And North Beach TV as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's another-
Just having a discussion.
Yeah, they have a building that's adjacent to Lions Club.
So they write us a check,
No.
even if it's $1.
Yeah, but you do pay the bills.
Yes. I think
Is
they
it a dollar?
do. They have a long-term
It-
lease with
apparently-
the city
Apparently it is a
for a
dollar.
very low amount. I thought it was, when we approved it, it was $10, wasn't it?
I think the CIC,
$5.
CIC was $1, I
I
think.
think they just took it off.
Yeah, CIC was $1.
Okay. CIC and Lions Club.
must be $1.
And now the golf course is different, in a different legal position than it was
Right.
2 years ago, because
Right.
the golf course now is
City
operating.
owned.
Right,
City owned.
exactly, operating.
So now they're real leases that have some kind of value received. CIC, Lions, TV.
Actually,
So
Richard?
this may be nitpicking, but what's the difference between what we're discussing right now and if I want to have a meeting with people in the public at the Lions Club? Aren't I in fact, when I hold those meetings, aren't I in fact trying to emphasize my position as a council member? Aren't I in fact campaigning? I'd like to know clarification.
Lions Club is separate of that. You could do that.
Yeah, and
You just schedule your time with the Lions Club.
I agree with you, Frank. I mean, it's the, because the Lions Club is the Lions Club, and it's actually, the senior center is overseeing it all, and if they allow it to happen, they're the leasing of the building, so.
So
that's-
convention center, someone could, as long as they wrote a check and rented
Yeah.
a room or
Correct.
something.
Yeah,
I
if
don't
they
think
want,
so. We own the,
yeah, if it's a third party for a candidate forum where all candidates are able to be there,
Let's
Has
just say,
to be all
let's just say I
candidates.
was running for election right now and I wanted to have a meeting in this room. And I wrote a check because I leased the space.
no,
No.
no, because you would be the sponsor.
That's right, and I'm renting it.
No, but
no, it doesn't work.
the city is controlled.
there has to be, between you as the candidate and the city, there has to be an intermediary.
So Eric could rent this room for me and I could come have my event.
As long as he invited everybody else.
What's the definition of everybody? Anybody?
All the
that
other
wanted to show?
candidates.
Oh, all the other candidates?
Correct.
Okay, got it, all the other candidates.
So then the Lions Club. So then the Lions Club has to do the same thing. It's
No.
leased.
But
But
it's leased by the Lions Club on a long term, it's not a short-term room or.
okay. So short term versus long.
You remember the golf course and the signs that were out and all the advertising and such that was going on. And that was allowed because Sander had the lease. He could do what he wanted.
Sarah had her hand up. I don't know if you can see her.
So I think there's a couple things to consider here. In 2021, the city received several complaints about the Lions Club being utilized for campaigning by individuals. At that time, there is documentation from you, Brent, to Crystal in an email form after talking about it and going with Jeff Moyer and talking to him about it, that you had come to the same conclusion that you could not have individual events that were not for everybody. And that did happen, and that is an email. So I think we're talking about two different things. The golf course is one thing, the Lions Club lease was a totally different thing because it was for campaigning. Kurt was the leasee, he promoted, he endorsed, he decided to put something out. Where the Lions Club was utilizing the city property for campaign purposes.
That's right. Now,
So they're two different things,
So-
and I think that's where there's some confusion.
so the subtlety is, it was Kurt as the tenant that was campaigning. Right? It's not
No.
not the Lions Club that's campaigning. It was Kurt that was campaigning.
The tenant hosted campaign events. He wasn't campaigning, he wasn't running for anything. He was hosting campaign events. People asked, because it was a city-owned property.
But wasn't my,
And you said it's legal because he leases the building. He can do what he wants in that building.
and did I say he could host or did I say he could promote?
You said he did not violate state law by actively campaigning in favor of one or more council candidates.
There you go. He
And
was
actively
campaigning.
campaigning against another
Correct.
candidate.
He campaigning. He individually campaigning.
So Chip Beatty of the PBC said, our conclusion regarding this property is that since it is leased out, it is not considered a public agency or facility. Therefore, any campaign activity is allowable and not a violation of RCW 42.17A.555.
And I think the issue
It's
was.
not a public facility. It wasn't there.
Right. But I think the issue was he individually campaigning for a particular candidate, whether or not that was appropriate on what was alleged to have been city.
I think we're kind of splitting hairs here, you know, the leasee is the leasee. I think, you know, city property shouldn't be used for campaigning if the city owns the property. If there's a leasee on city property.
And runs it.
And runs it, right. You know, so just so that we are being consistent with, you know, because it can be interpreted, but I don't want to get too confused and too messed up and, you know, things get too complicated that you know, personally, I'm good with where it's at, so. Since it's leased, you know, but you all can decide, this isn't, yes, you know, but.
So I'm still confused, and I think now, as I listen to all this, that the Lions Club, if I wanted to rent the Lions Club and promote myself as a candidate, I can do that and do it legally. So my second question, related, if when this meeting gets over tonight and I walk out of the hallway and somebody asks me a question about my campaign, do I have to go to McDonald's to answer the question?
No.
I'm not campaigning? If somebody asks me a direct question?
You're not fundraising, you're not, you know, stomping.
Okay. I apologize for being nitpicky, but social media is pretty vicious and nitpicky.
I don't know that I agree with you, Brent, because when we have union elections, you could not talk about the election, you could not talk about candidates, you had to be off the property to talk about that. So, and that's basically run the same way as the city. You know, they really have to watch their campaign procedures and stuff. So you couldn't use their phones, you couldn't use any of their paper, you couldn't talk about it, you had to be off the property to do it. So that's how we had to do it. It's still done that way.
But with that philosophy, that would mean that if you had magnetic signs on your car, you couldn't drive it in the parking lot.
That'd be correct. Not a philosophy, I mean, that's how it was done. That was the rules.
Well, I think the union rules are, because union negotiations, I think, are different than political. I mean, because I've never heard that you can't put a sign on your car in a city parking lot.
Well, I'm not saying that. What I'm telling you is it's not a union contract. It was the policy that you had to follow during election time. You couldn't use any of their equipment, their phones, any of that stuff, which is the same for the city. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't care if you talk about it out here in the hallway, to be honest with you, but I'm just saying.
Lisa?
One last thing, Brett, would this be more of a policy that we would decide versus, like as a city, we would say, okay, yes, you can do this, but as a city, we're just not gonna allow it, or we're gonna allow it?
That's correct. I think that was, the point of the discussion was if you all as a body wanted to develop a policy going forward, so there wasn't a gray area, so if there was a complaint, it would be, you could direct it to the policy.
And I actually think that would be a good idea to do in a non-election year. Let's not do that in the middle of an election. But we could do it next year to make a policy for the next election, I think would be a very wise thing to do.
See you the second Monday of November.
Okay, I think we got it. So basically, the conclusion is anyone that's running for office can have time at the Lions Club.
Or CIC.
Well, I don't know if the CIC is open for.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it is, but it's still.
Well, I mean, they could use it, the Lions Club is the one that has to say whether they can or can't. That's not, you can't just go in and say, hey,
Right.
you have to let me use it.
Right.
It's up to the leasee of who can and can't. So, because that's what we did with the golf course, same type of thing.
Permission.
Okay, I'm just curious. So
With
say,
permission of,
but say, they say no.
then you don't get to use it.
So they could say no to every candidate, but say yes
Sure.
for one.
Sure.
Sure they could. They lease it. If we've got a real lease, absolutely correct.
Okay.
And I think we'd remember that when it comes time for budget.
Okay. All right, so we're done? Okay. All right, so then.